Penn Station at dusk is a symphony of organized chaos, a concrete and steel heart pumping thousands of hurried souls through its arteries. The air, thick with the scent of hot pretzels and metallic dust, hums with the constant announcements and the screech of train wheels against steel tracks. Fluorescent lights cast a harsh, unforgiving glare on the sea of faces, each one a story moving too fast to be read, a blur of purpose and fatigue. Amid this river of indifference, a small island of warmth existed on a cold, tiled shore. There sat Laura, her face etched with the lines of long days and sleepless nights, yet her eyes held the steady, gentle light of a lighthouse. At her feet, her children, 7-year-old Leo and 5-year-old Sophie, were a world unto themselves, their quiet laughter a fragile melody nearly lost in the station's roar. They were her everything, a small, perfect universe in the middle of an uncaring galaxy. Observing them from across the bustling concourse was a woman who seemed to belong to another reality entirely. Claire stood with a stillness that defied the motion around her, a statue of tailored elegance. Her 48 years were worn like a suit of armor, a designer power suit, understated pearls, and a posture that spoke of boardrooms and unquestioned authority. She was the picture of success, a woman who had conquered the city's highest peaks. Yet, her eyes told a different story. They were not the eyes of a victor, but of someone haunted by a profound emptiness, a deep, glacial melancholy that no amount of wealth could thaw. She watched the little family not with judgment, but with an agonizing, visceral hunger. The sight of Sophie's bright blue eyes and Leo's trusting hand in his mother's was a beautiful, unbearable torture, a reflection of the one thing her power could never purchase. With a subtle nod to her husband, Richard, who stood impatiently by her side, Claire began to move. They crossed the floor with a predatory grace, their expensive shoes making no sound against the worn tiles. They stopped before Laura, their shadows falling over the children. "You have the most beautiful children," Claire said, her voice a carefully constructed melody of warmth that didn't quite reach her desolate eyes. Laura looked up, a flicker of suspicion clouding her tired features, and she instinctively pulled her children closer. She offered a polite but wary "thank you," her body language a protective shield. Richard knelt slightly, his smile too wide, asking their names and ages. The questions felt like an intrusion, a violation of their sacred space, and Laura's answers were clipped, her gaze darting towards the train schedule, desperate for the escape her ticket promised. The air grew thick with a tension only a mother could feel. The world dissolved into a deafening roar as the 7:15 express to Montauk thundered into the station. The platform surged, a wave of bodies pressing forward, and in that single, chaotic moment, the trap was sprung. The noise provided the perfect cover, a violent blanket of sound that smothered all else. With a speed that was terrifyingly precise, Richard scooped a bewildered Leo into his arms, while Claire's manicured fingers wrapped around Sophie's tiny wrist. It was a fluid, rehearsed motion. Laura turned, her eyes widening in sheer, uncomprehending horror as she saw her children being swallowed by the crowd, moving towards the open train doors. A scream tore from the very depths of her soul, a raw, primal sound of absolute loss. But it was nothing more than a whisper against the shriek of the train. It was a silent scream, unheard by anyone, as her world was ripped away. The silence of the limousine was a stark contrast to the station's earlier roar, a vacuum that seemed to amplify the children's shallow, frightened breaths. They arrived at a building that scraped the sky, its lobby a cavern of polished marble and hushed reverence. The elevator ascended without a sound, a vertical coffin carrying them to Claire's world. Her apartment was a museum of a life, not a home. White walls stretched towards impossibly high ceilings, adorned with abstract art that held no warmth. The furniture was sculptural, sharp-edged and unforgiving. Leo and Sophie stood on a vast Persian rug, their small, worn sneakers looking like a sacrilege on its intricate patterns. This cold, silent expanse was their new cage, a place so devoid of life it felt like the air itself was made of glass, ready to shatter with a single wrong move. Claire moved with a brittle, frantic energy, her composure from the station completely gone. She was playing a role she had rehearsed in her mind for years, but the reality was clumsy and terrifying. She opened cabinets, revealing stacks of elegantly packaged organic snacks, offering them with a strained smile that didn't reach her haunted eyes. She brought out toys still in their boxes, a miniature electric car, and a dollhouse larger than any they had ever seen. But her offerings were met with a wall of silence. Leo wrapped a protective arm around Sophie, his small face a mask of stoic defiance. They were not impressed by the wealth. They were captives, and they understood this with the pure, undiluted clarity of children. They wanted their mother, not a palace, and every gilded object only highlighted the poverty of their new reality. Meanwhile, back at Penn Station, Laura's world had been reduced to the cold, impersonal procedure of a police report. The initial chaos had given way to a numbing fog of disbelief. She answered questions from a weary officer, her voice a broken whisper, repeating her children's names, their ages, what they were wearing. Each detail was a fresh stab of pain. The officer's tone was professional but detached. To him, this was another case file, another tragedy in a city that manufactured them daily. Laura felt invisible. Her monumental, soul-crushing loss translated into neat lines on a standardized form. She was surrounded by people, yet she had never felt more alone. A ghost haunting the scene of her own life's destruction, her heart screaming into a void that offered no echo. It's a cruel irony that the systems designed to protect us can often feel like another wall to climb, another voice that doesn't quite hear the desperation in our own. Laura was just one mother in a sea of faces, her story at risk of being lost in the shuffle of a city that never stops moving. It's for people like her, whose worlds are shattered in an instant, that these stories must be told and remembered. If you believe that every voice deserves to be heard, especially those crying out in the dark, then subscribing to this channel helps us to keep bringing them into the light. Your support ensures that these powerful human experiences are not forgotten, giving strength to those who feel they have none left, and reminding us of the profound connections that bind us all together. Back in the sterile silence of the apartment, the first true crack in Claire's delusion appeared. Sophie, who had been trembling silently for what felt like an eternity, finally let out a small, choked sob. It was a tiny sound in the cavernous living room, but it carried the weight of a collapsing world. She refused the artisanal juice box Claire offered, pushing it away with a weak hand. She didn't want the dollhouse or the designer cookies. She wanted the familiar comfort of her mother's arms, the simple security of her presence. Claire's carefully constructed fantasy began to fray at the edges. This wasn't the grateful, happy family she had envisioned. This was a raw, gaping wound, and she was the one holding the knife, her hands covered in the evidence of their pain. The small sobs grew into a torrent of inconsolable weeping. Sophie's cries were not loud or angry, but a deep, mournful wail that seemed to come from the very core of her being. She curled into a tight ball on the floor, her little body shaking, repeating the one word that shattered Claire's fragile reality over and over again. Mommy. The word echoed off the cold marble floors and minimalist walls, a sound of pure, desperate love that Claire had never heard directed at her. It was a name she had yearned to be called, but hearing it now, from the lips of a terrified child she had stolen, felt like a judgment. It was the sound of her failure, a testament to the fact that she had not created a family, but had brutally dismantled one. Leo, seeing his sister's distress, moved to her side. He knelt on the expensive rug, his own fear forgotten in his need to comfort her. He wrapped his small arms around her shaking shoulders and pulled her close, just as he had seen his mother do 100 times. He began to hum, a simple, slightly off-key tune. Then words followed, whispered into Sophie's hair. It was a lullaby, one their mother sang to them every night, a song about a little boat sailing home to a safe harbor. The melody was achingly simple, filled with a history of love, comfort, and unwavering security. In that sterile, art-filled room, the child's lullaby was the most beautiful and heartbreaking thing Claire had ever heard, a sacred hymn from a world she had just desecrated. Some moments are so pure they cut through every lie we tell ourselves, holding up a mirror to the truth we've been desperate to avoid. That simple lullaby was such a moment for Claire. It wasn't just a song, it was the entire universe of love and trust she had just stolen, condensed into a few fragile notes. It's in these quiet, earth-shattering revelations that a story truly finds its heart. Your subscription is what makes it possible for us to continue exploring these profound turning points, to share narratives that remind us of the incredible power of human connection. It allows us to keep the light on, searching for the moments that define us, for better or for worse, and to share them with the world. Later that night, unable to bear the silence punctuated by Sophie's soft whimpers, Claire turned on the television. The local news channel flickered to life, and there she was. Laura's face filled the screen, not as the tired but resilient woman from the station, but as a mother completely ravaged by grief. Her eyes were swollen, her expression a mask of raw agony as she made a desperate, televised plea. She spoke directly to the camera, to whoever had her children, not with anger, but with a heartbreaking appeal. She described Leo's love for drawing superheroes and how Sophie couldn't sleep without her worn-out stuffed bear. The abstract crime Claire had committed now had a face, a voice, and a story, and it was infinitely more monstrous than she had allowed herself to believe. Richard found her standing there, mesmerized by the screen. His reaction was devoid of the emotional turmoil that was tearing Claire apart. He saw only a problem, a logistical nightmare. "We need to go," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I have contacts. We can be on a plane to a non-extradition country by morning. We'll change our names, start over." He spoke of it as if it were a hostile corporate takeover, a situation to be managed and escaped. He looked at the closed bedroom door where the children were hidden and saw only liability. There was no remorse in his eyes, only the cold, calculating fear of a man whose perfect life was about to be ruined. He was not her partner in a shared dream, but an accomplice in a crime he now regretted for purely selfish reasons. Claire felt a chasm open between them. Richard's pragmatism was horrifying, a stark reflection of how far they had fallen. She was trapped, paralyzed by a war raging within her. One part of her, the desperate, aching part that had driven her to this act, still clung to the fantasy of being a mother to these children, but another, more powerful part was being consumed by a tidal wave of guilt. She looked at her own hands, the ones that had steered Sophie away from her mother, and they seemed alien, the hands of a monster. The silence from the children's room was no longer a sign of peace, but a heavy, suffocating blanket of sorrow that she herself had woven. The dream had curdled into a waking nightmare from which there was no escape. Miles away, in a brightly lit precinct office, NYPD Detective Miller leaned closer to his monitor, replaying the grainy security footage from Penn Station for the 10th time. He was a man who believed that every story left a trace, a ghost in the machine. He ignored the blurs of the anonymous crowd and focused on the small details, the expensive shoes, the precise, rehearsed way the couple moved, the way their elegance was a jarring note in the symphony of commuter chaos. He saw the exact moment Richard scooped up Leo, the fluid motion that was too smooth, too practiced. It wasn't a spontaneous act of madness. It was planned. Miller felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. This wasn't a random abduction. This was a hunt, and the hunters had left a scent. The clock was ticking, and he was beginning to hear it. The dream was over. Claire stood in the doorway of the guest room, watching the two small figures sleeping under a duvet that cost more than their mother likely made in a month. The sight no longer brought a flicker of twisted fulfillment, only a profound and hollow ache. Richard's pragmatic, soulless plan to flee echoed in her mind, a testament to how completely he misunderstood the wound inside her. This wasn't a business deal gone wrong, it was a sacrilege. She couldn't build a life on the foundations of another's shattered heart. Laura's face on the television, raw with a grief Claire herself had inflicted, was seared into her memory. With a trembling hand, she picked up a burner phone she had bought months ago, a relic from a fantasy she now had to dismantle. Her fingers dialed the police hotline, and with a voice disguised by a choked whisper, she gave an address, a small, quiet park, and a promise. She drove through the pre-dawn stillness of Manhattan, the city lights a blur of indifferent constellations. In the back seat, Leo and Sophie were bundled in warm coats, drifting in and out of a drowsy, confused sleep. Claire had told them they were going on an early morning adventure to meet their mother, a lie that felt like the first honest thing she had done in days. She didn't look at them in the rearview mirror, afraid that meeting their eyes would shatter her resolve. Every turn of the wheel was a physical act of repentance, a painful undoing of the monstrous step she had taken at the station. She was not a mother returning her children. She was a kidnapper returning her victims. The distinction was a blade twisting in her gut, and she knew she deserved every inch of its cold, sharp steel. This silent, lonely drive was her penance, a journey back from the edge of a moral abyss. The park was empty, an oasis of peace under the pale glow of antique-style lamps. A single wooden bench sat near the entrance of a small, historic church, as if waiting for them. Claire gently lifted a sleeping Sophie from the car, while Leo followed, his hand hesitantly taking hers. She sat them on the bench, pulling their coats tight against the morning chill. Kneeling before them on the cold pavement, she felt her carefully constructed world finally crumble into dust. "Aunt, your mommy will be here soon," she whispered, her voice breaking. She leaned in and pressed a feather-light kiss to each of their foreheads, a final, agonizing goodbye to a dream that had become a nightmare. From her pocket, she produced Sophie's worn teddy bear, recovered from the station floor, and tucked it into the little girl's arms. Then she stood, turned, and walked away, forcing herself not to look back. From the deep shadows of an alley across the street, she watched. It was the longest 10 minutes of her life. Then the first police car arrived, its lights flashing but its sirens silent. A respectful quiet in the sacred space. A few moments later, a second car screeched to a halt, and Laura practically fell out of it. She stood frozen for a single heart-stopping second, her eyes locking onto the two small figures on the bench. A sound tore from her throat, a cry of such raw, explosive relief that it seemed to shake the very air. She ran, not with the frantic energy of fear, but with the gravitational pull of a mother returning to her center. Claire watched as Laura collapsed to her knees, gathering her children into an embrace so fierce and complete it was a world unto itself. It was the image of pure, unconditional love, a masterpiece she had stolen and now returned, forever an outsider looking in. Hours later, the sun was up, and Claire sat in a cold, grey interrogation room across from Detective Miller. The designer suit felt like a costume, the woman who wore it a stranger. There were no tears left, only a vast, empty calm. She recounted everything, her voice low and steady, omitting nothing. She spoke of the years of infertility, the crushing weight of a life that felt incomplete, and the moment in Penn Station when her desperation had curdled into a criminal act. She didn't ask for pity or understanding. She offered only the unvarnished truth of her profound failure as a human being. Miller listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. As she finished speaking, Claire felt not the terror of impending punishment, but the quiet, fragile beginning of release. In confessing her crime, she was finally taking the first step out of the prison she had built for herself. The scales of justice, often perceived as cold and unfeeling, sometimes weigh the heart. Claire's full and immediate confession, her profound remorse, and the undeniable fact that she had returned the children unharmed, resonated in the courtroom. She was not painted as a monster, but as a woman broken by a profound and private grief whose desperation led her to a terrible moral failure. Her sentence, while significant, was not the life-destroying verdict Richard received for his cold complicity. In the quiet solitude of her cell, Claire did not find despair. Instead, she found a strange and unexpected clarity. The emptiness that had haunted her for decades began to recede, replaced not by the fantasy of a child's love, but by the solid, grounding weight of responsibility. She had caused a wound, and now she would dedicate the rest of her life to healing, not just for Laura, but for all the women who walked a similar precipice of quiet desperation. Upon her release, Claire dismantled her former life with the same precision she had once used to build it. The cavernous apartment with its soulless art, the portfolio of stocks, the designer wardrobe, all of it was liquidated, converted from symbols of empty status into fuel for a new purpose. With her entire fortune, she established a foundation dedicated to a single, powerful mission: to create a safety net so strong that no mother would ever have to feel the terror and vulnerability that Laura had endured. It was more than a charity, it was an engine of change, providing safe housing, legal aid, educational grants, and mental health support. Claire herself worked tirelessly, not from a corner office, but on the ground, her formidable legal skills now a shield for the powerless. She had finally found what she was looking for, not in possessing a family, but in serving a community. Laura and her children were the Foundation's first and most important project. They were moved from their precarious existence into a bright, secure apartment in a neighborhood with parks and good schools. For the first time, Laura could breathe. The constant, grinding fear for her children's future was lifted, replaced by the simple, beautiful reality of watching them thrive. Leo's artistic talents blossomed with proper supplies, his superhero drawings covering the walls of his very own room. Sophie, surrounded by stability and love, grew into a confident, joyful child. Freed from the burden of mere survival, Laura enrolled in college, pursuing a degree in social work. Her experience had forged in her an unbreakable empathy, a desire to be the helping hand for others that she had so desperately needed. The scars of their ordeal remained, but they were now part of a story of resilience, not just of loss. Years later, at the opening of a new daycare center funded by the Foundation, the air buzzed with the joyful sounds of children playing. Laura stood near the entrance, now the center's director, her expression one of serene competence. Leo and Sophie, now vibrant young teenagers, helped hand out juice and snacks. Across the room, Claire watched them, her presence quiet and unassuming. She and Laura caught each other's eye, and in that shared glance, a universe of understanding passed between them. There was no need for words of forgiveness or apology. Their actions had already spoken. The circle of pain had been closed and transformed into a legacy of hope. It is for moments like these, for the quiet victories of the human spirit, that we continue to tell these stories. Your presence here, as part of this journey, helps ensure that tales of redemption and profound change can continue to be shared, reminding us all that from the deepest wounds, a powerful healing can grow.